Daddy, I'm on the plane. But something's happening and I think you need to know about it. The flight attendant is moving black passengers to the back.
Flight attendant orders black passengers to the back. Everything changes when an 8-year-old calls her multi-billionaire dad. Sometimes the worst kind of power is the kind no one questions. And on Flight 447, scheduled for a routine 3-hour journey from Atlanta to Seattle, one flight attendant was about to learn that the authority pinned to her uniform meant nothing when the truth had a witness. That witness was 8 years old. Her name was Kassandra Ryan. And what she saw that day would expose something ugly, something deliberate, and something that had been happening in plain sight for far too long. It started in the boarding area. Passengers filed through the gate with the usual mixture of exhaustion and relief, dragging carry-ons, juggling coffee cups, checking seat numbers. The plane was a Boeing 737, nothing remarkable. But somewhere between row 12 and row 23, a pattern was forming. And flight attendant Nicole Harris was the one orchestrating it. Ruth Johnson was 72 years old. She had flown dozens of times in her life, back when flying still felt like an event, back when people dressed up and spoke in polite tones. She moved slowly now, her knees stiff, her carry-on bag weighing heavy on her shoulder. She found her assigned seat in row 14, aisle seat, just like her ticket said. She sat down carefully, exhaled with relief, and closed her eyes for just a moment. She had been traveling since 5 that morning to visit her daughter in Seattle. She was tired. She was ready to rest. That's when Nicole Harris appeared. "Excuse me, ma'am," Nicole said, her voice sharp and clipped. "You're going to need to move." Ruth opened her eyes, confused. "I'm sorry." "You need to move toward the back of the plane," Nicole repeated, louder this time, as if Ruth hadn't heard her the first time. "We're rebalancing the cabin for weight distribution." Ruth blinked. Weight distribution. She'd never heard that before. "But this is my seat," she said gently, holding up her boarding pass. 14C, right here." Nicole didn't even look at the boarding pass. "Company policy. Please gather your things and move to row 31. Row 31. That was near the very back of the plane, right next to the lavatories. Ruth felt something tighten in her chest, something familiar and cold. She glanced around. Other passengers were watching now. Some pretended not to notice. Others stared openly, curious, uncomfortable. Ruth stood slowly. She didn't argue. She had learned a long time ago that some battles weren't worth the fight, not when you were alone, not when you were 72 and just trying to get home. She gathered her bag, her hands shaking slightly, and began the long walk toward the back. But Ruth Johnson wasn't the only one. Malik Carter was seated in row 16, window seat. He was 34, dressed in a tailored navy suit, laptop bag tucked neatly under the seat in front of him. He was a regional sales manager for a tech firm on his way to close a deal in Seattle. He had flown first class twice that year. Today he was in economy, but he didn't mind. He was professional, polished, used to being underestimated and proving people wrong with results. Nicole Harris stopped at his row. "Sir, I'm going to need you to move." Malik looked up, eyebrows raised. "Huh? My seat is 16A. Weight distribution," Nicole said, the same phrase, the same tone. "You'll need to relocate to row 29. Malik's jaw tightened. He glanced at the passengers around him. A white couple in row 15. A white businessman in row 17. None of them had been asked to move. He felt the heat rising in his face, but he kept his voice calm. "Can I see the policy on that?" Nicole's smile was cold. "Sir, if you refuse to comply, I can have you removed from this flight." Malik stared at her. He could feel every eye in the cabin on him now. He thought about the meeting waiting for him in Seattle. He thought about the optics of being escorted off a plane. He thought about how this would look, how it would sound, how it would follow him. He stood up. He moved to row 29. And then there was Tanya Brooks, 31 years old, traveling with her 6-year-old son, Jamal. They were seated in row 18, middle and aisle. Jamal had his backpack on his lap, excited about the trip, asking his mom when they'd be in the clouds. Tanya was trying to keep him calm, keep him happy, keep him safe. Nicole Harris appeared again. "Ma'am, You and your son need to move to the back. Tanya froze. What? Why? Weight distribution. Row 33. Tanya looked at her son. She looked at the other passengers. She looked at Nicole Harris, standing there with her clipboard and her cold authority, and she made a decision that mothers have been making for generations. She complied. Not because she agreed. Not because it was right. But because she had a child to protect, and she knew what happened to black people who caused scenes on airplanes. She took Jamal's hand. They moved to row 33. And through all of this, from her seat in row 10, Kassandra Ryan watched. Kassandra was 8 years old, small for her age, with dark curls pulled into 2 neat puffs and brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. She was flying alone, a routine her father had arranged many times before. She had her tablet, her headphones, her snack bag. She looked like any other unaccompanied minor on any other flight. But Kassandra Ryan was not like other children. She had been raised by a man who taught her to notice patterns, to ask questions, to never assume that authority was the same thing as correctness. Her father, Marcus Ryan, was one of the wealthiest investors in the country, a man whose portfolio included stakes in airlines, hotels, logistics companies, and more. Kassandra had sat in boardrooms. She had listened to conference calls. She understood power in a way most 8-year-olds never would. And right now, she was watching Nicole Harris enforce a rule that didn't make sense. Kassandra raised her hand, polite and small. "Excuse me?" Nicole Harris glanced at her, irritated. "Yes. Why did those people have to move, but no one else did?" Nicole's expression hardened. "Weight distribution, sweetheart. It's a safety policy." Kassandra tilted her head. But the people in the rows next to them didn't move. And they look about the same size. A few passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. Nicole's smile disappeared entirely. "Little girl, this is an adult matter. Stay in your seat and mind your business." Kassandra didn't respond. She just watched. And she remembered. Because Kassandra Ryan had one more thing most 8-year-olds didn't have. She had her father's direct line. And she knew exactly when to use it. If you want to see how an 8-year-old dismantles an entire system of discrimination with one phone call, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't believe what happens next. Have you ever witnessed discrimination on a flight? Drop your answer in the comments below. The plane was beginning to fill completely now, passengers settling into their seats, overhead bins slamming shut, flight attendants moving through the aisles with their practiced efficiency. But in the back of the plane, in rows 29 through 33, something heavy hung in the air. Humiliation, anger, and the bitter taste of a fight you knew you couldn't win. Ruth Johnson sat in row 31, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. Her daughter had warned her about flying these days. "Mama, you never know what kind of treatment you're going to get," she'd said. Ruth had brushed it off. She'd been flying for decades. She thought those days were behind them. But here she was, 72 years old, sitting in the back of a plane because a flight attendant with a clipboard decided that's where she belonged. Ruth wasn't naive. She knew what this was. She'd lived through enough to recognize the pattern, the tone, the selection. But what could she do? She was alone. She was elderly. She was tired. And the last thing she wanted was to be dragged off a plane and have her face plastered all over the internet as some angry black woman causing a scene. So she sat. She stayed quiet. And she prayed the flight would just be over soon. A few rows ahead, Malik Carter sat rigid in his seat, jaw clenched, staring at the seat back in front of him. He had pulled out his phone and typed out 3 separate texts to his wife, each one angrier than the last, before deleting all of them. What was he supposed to say? That he'd been moved to the back of a plane in 2025 because of some fabricated weight distribution policy? That he'd complied because he didn't want to risk his career? That he felt ashamed for not fighting back? Malik was a man who prided himself on control, on professionalism, on being twice as good to get half as far, just like his father had taught him. But right now, sitting in row 29, he felt like he had failed some invisible test. And the worst part was he didn't even know how to pass it. Across the aisle, Tanya Brooks was trying to keep her son calm. Jamal had started asking questions. "Mommy, Why did we have to move? I liked our other seats better. It's okay, baby, Tanya whispered, forcing a smile. It's just airplane stuff. We're still going to Seattle. We're still going to see Grandma. But Jamal wasn't satisfied. That lady was mean. Tanya's heart squeezed. She wanted to tell her son the truth. She wanted to explain that sometimes the world wasn't fair, that sometimes people treated you differently because of the color of your skin, that this wasn't the first time and it wouldn't be the last. But he was 6. He still believed the world was kind. And she wasn't ready to break that for him yet. So she handed him a pack of gummy bears and turned her face toward the window, blinking back tears. Meanwhile, up in the front half of the cabin, Nicole Harris moved with confidence. She checked seatbelts, closed overhead bins, smiled at passengers who smiled at her. She had been a flight attendant for 11 years, and in that time, she had learned how to control a cabin. Authority was about tone, about presence, about making sure people knew who was in charge. And Nicole Harris was very good at being in charge. She stopped by row 10, where Kassandra Ryan sat with her tablet on her lap, headphones around her neck. Everything okay here, sweetheart? Nicole asked, her voice sugary and patronizing. Kassandra looked up. Yes, ma'am. But if you need anything, just press the call button. Nicole's smile didn't reach her eyes. She had already dismissed the child's earlier question as irrelevant. Kids asked questions about everything. It didn't mean anything. But Kassandra was still watching. Still noticing. She noticed that the passengers who had been moved were all black. She noticed that the passengers who stayed in their assigned seats were not. She noticed that Nicole Harris had used the same phrase, weight distribution, each time, but had offered no explanation, no logic, no actual policy reference. And Kassandra, who had been taught by her father to question everything, especially when authority seemed arbitrary, knew that something was deeply wrong. She glanced toward the back of the plane, where Ruth Johnson sat with her hands folded, where Malik Carter stared straight ahead, where Tanya Brooks whispered to her son. And Kassandra made a decision. Not yet, but soon. Because Kassandra Ryan had learned one more thing from her father. Timing mattered. And the right moment to act wasn't always the first moment. Sometimes you had to wait. You had to gather information. You had to let the other side think they'd won. And then you struck. Nicole Harris returned to the front galley, pulling out her phone to check a text. Another flight attendant, a younger woman named Stephanie, approached her quietly. Hey, Nicole? A couple of passengers are asking me about the seating changes. They're saying it seemed targeted. Nicole's eyes flashed. Targeted? Stephanie lowered her voice. I'm just telling you what I'm hearing. Nicole straightened, her expression hardening. If anyone has a problem, they can file a complaint after we land. Right now, my job is to ensure the safety of this flight, and that's what I'm doing. Understood? Stephanie nodded quickly and walked away. Nicole watched her go, irritation prickling at the edges of her confidence. She had done this before. Not often, but enough times to know how it worked. People complained in whispers, maybe posted on social media later, but by then the flight was over, the passengers were scattered, and nothing ever came of it. The system protected her. The uniform protected her. And the company always backed its crew over passengers, especially passengers who made accusations without proof. Nicole Harris felt untouchable. But back in row 10, Kassandra Ryan pulled out her phone. It was a simple device, restricted and monitored by her father, with only a few numbers programmed in. Emergency contacts. Her school. Her grandmother. And one more. Her father. Kassandra stared at the screen for a long moment. She thought about what her father had told her the last time they talked about injustice. Kassandra, if you ever see something wrong, something that hurts people, don't stay silent. But be smart. Be sure. And be ready to follow through. She was sure. She had seen it with her own eyes. Ruth Johnson, humiliated and moved. Malik Carter, forced to comply. Tanya Brooks, protecting her child by surrendering her dignity. Kassandra glanced toward the front of the cabin, where Nicole Harris stood with her back turned, checking her watch, confident that her authority had settled the matter. Kassandra pressed the call button. Nicole turned, annoyed, and walked back to row 10. Yes. Can I make a phone call? Kassandra asked politely. Nicole's patience was wearing thin. We're about to take off, sweetheart. Phone calls aren't allowed. It's to my dad. He asked me to check in before we took off. Nicole sighed. Make it quick. And turn it off as soon as we're in the air. She walked away, already dismissing the child again. Kassandra unlocked her phone. She pulled up her father's contact. And she pressed call. It rang twice. Then a deep, calm voice answered. Kassandra? Everything okay? Kassandra took a breath. She kept her voice low and steady, the way her father had taught her. Daddy, I'm on the plane. But something's happening, and I think you need to know about it. There was a pause. Then, tell me everything. And Kassandra did. This is where everything changes. Don't click away now. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment when power meets truth. If you were Kassandra, would you have made the call? Let me know in the comments. Marcus Ryan was in his office on the 43rd floor of a high-rise in downtown Chicago when his daughter called. He had been reviewing quarterly reports for one of his portfolio companies, a logistics firm with operations across 6 states, when his phone buzzed. Kassandra's name appeared on the screen. He answered immediately. Marcus was not a man who panicked. He had built his fortune by staying calm under pressure, by reading situations clearly, by knowing when to act and when to wait. But when his 8-year-old daughter called him from a plane to report discrimination, something cold and sharp settled in his chest. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He asked 3 clarifying questions. And then he said, "Stay calm, sweetheart. Don't do anything else. I'm handling this." Marcus ended the call. He sat back in his chair for exactly 5 seconds, processing. Then he picked up his phone again and made a different call. "David, it's Marcus Ryan. I need you to connect me with the executive office at Skybridge Airlines. Right now." David Shen was Marcus's chief of staff, a man who had worked with him for 12 years and knew exactly what "right now" meant. "What's the situation?" "Discrimination on Flight 447, Atlanta to Seattle. My daughter is on that plane, and she just reported that a flight attendant is moving black passengers to the back under a fake policy." There was a brief pause. Then, "I'm on it. Give me 3 minutes." Marcus hung up and made another call. This one to his attorney. Then another to his publicist. Then one more to a contact he had at the FAA. Marcus Ryan had not become one of the most influential investors in the country by waiting for systems to work. He made systems work. And when they didn't, he dismantled them. By the time Flight 447's door closed and the plane began to push back from the gate, 6 different people in 6 different offices were already making calls on Marcus Ryan's behalf. And none of them knew yet just how bad this was about to get for Skybridge Airlines. Back on the plane, Kassandra sat quietly in her seat, tablet back on her lap, headphones over her ears. To anyone watching, she looked like a normal child, absorbed in a game or a video. But inside, her heart was racing. She had done what her father asked. She had reported what she saw. Now she had to trust that he would handle the rest. But something else was happening in the cabin. Other passengers had started talking. In row 12, a white woman named Jennifer leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Did you see that? They moved all those people to the back. All of them were black." Her husband frowned. "Maybe it's a weight thing? Come on. You really believe that?" Tom shifted uncomfortably. He didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to think about what it meant if it was true. But he had seen it. And now that his wife had said it out loud, he couldn't unsee it. In row 19, a college student named Aisha had already pulled out her phone and started recording. She had seen the whole thing. She had watched Nicole Harris move Ruth Johnson, Malik Carter, and Tanya Brooks, and she had watched her ignore everyone else. Aisha was a journalism major. She knew a story when she saw one. And she knew that video evidence was the only thing that mattered anymore. She angled her phone carefully, keeping it low, capturing the back of the plane where the displaced passengers now sat. She recorded Nicole Harris walking through the aisle with her clipboard, confident, unbothered. And she saved every second of it. Nicole Harris, meanwhile, was beginning to feel the shift. It was subtle at first. A few passengers watching her a little too closely. A few whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by. But Nicole had been doing this long enough to know when a cabin was turning. And this one was starting to turn. She approached the front galley where Stephanie was preparing the beverage cart. "Did you notice anything weird?" Nicole asked quietly. Stephanie hesitated. "Like what?" "Passengers staring. Talking." Stephanie glanced toward the cabin. "I mean, a few people seemed uncomfortable with the seating changes." Nicole's jaw tightened. "They'll get over it." But she wasn't sure anymore. The plane reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign turned off. Nicole began the beverage service, moving through the aisles with her cart, asking passengers what they wanted to drink, handing out pretzels and napkins. She reached row 10. Kassandra looked up. "Would you like something to drink, sweetheart?" Nicole asked, her voice tight. "Apple juice, please," Kassandra said politely. Nicole handed her a plastic cup and a small bottle of juice. As she did, Kassandra looked her directly in the eye and said, very quietly, "My dad says people who abuse their power always get caught eventually." Nicole froze. "What did you just say?" Kassandra didn't repeat it. She just opened her juice and took a sip. Nicole stared at her for a long moment, something uneasy creeping up her spine. But she forced a smile and moved on. By the time the beverage cart reached the back of the plane, the tension was thick enough to cut. Ruth Johnson declined a drink, too anxious to consume anything. Malik Carter asked for water, his voice clipped and professional, refusing to show emotion. Tanya Brooks took a ginger ale for Jamal and nothing for herself. And Nicole Harris felt the weight of their silence like an accusation. 40 minutes into the flight, the intercom crackled. "Flight attendants, please report to the front galley." Nicole glanced at Stephanie, confused. They had just finished the beverage service. There was no reason for a galley call. But she walked to the front, where the lead attendant, Monica, was waiting with a phone pressed to her ear, her face pale. "Nicole, I just got a call from the operations center. Captain Morrison wants to see you in the cockpit." Nicole's stomach dropped. "Why?" Monica's eyes were wide. "I don't know. But they said it's urgent." Nicole walked toward the cockpit, her confidence beginning to crack. She knocked. The door opened. Captain Daniel Morrison, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a reputation for fairness, stood waiting. "Come in," he said. His voice was calm, but his expression was not. Nicole stepped inside. The door closed behind her. This is the moment everything flips. If you're not subscribed, do it now. You do not want to miss what happens next. Do you think Nicole knew she was caught? Comment below. Captain Daniel Morrison had been flying commercial aircraft for 27 years. He had handled engine failures, medical emergencies, unruly passengers, and severe weather. He prided himself on staying calm, following protocol, and protecting his crew. But the call he had just received from the Skybridge Airlines executive office was unlike anything he had dealt with before. The voice on the other end had been direct. "Captain Morrison, we have a credible report of discriminatory seating enforcement on your flight. We need you to investigate immediately and report back. This is coming from the top." Morrison had asked for details. The response was brief but damning. Multiple passengers moved to the rear of the aircraft based on race, under the guise of weight distribution, by flight attendant Nicole Harris. Now, standing in the cockpit with Nicole in front of him, Morrison studied her carefully. She looked nervous, defensive, like someone who had just realized the ground was no longer solid beneath her feet. "Nicole, I need you to walk me through the seating changes you made before takeoff," Morrison said evenly. Nicole straightened, trying to project confidence. "Weight distribution, Captain. Standard procedure." Were passengers in surrounding rows also asked to move? Nicole hesitated. "No, but..." "Were the passengers you moved selected based on any objective criteria? Weight measurements? Boarding data? Seat assignments?" Nicole's mouth opened, then closed. "I used my judgment." Morrison's expression didn't change. "Your judgment? Based on what factors?" Nicole faltered. "I've been doing this for 11 years, Captain. I know how to balance a cabin." "Then explain to me why every passenger you moved was black, And every passenger you allowed to remain in their assigned seat was not. The words hung in the cockpit like a verdict. Nicole's face went pale. That's not, I didn't. Morrison held up a hand. I've already been informed that there's video evidence. Multiple passengers recorded your actions. And one of the passengers you displaced is the daughter of Marcus Ryan. Nicole blinked. Who? Morrison's voice was cold now. Marcus Ryan is a major investor with significant holdings in this airline. His 8-year-old daughter is in row 10, and she called him mid-boarding to report what she witnessed. You just discriminated against passengers on a flight carrying the daughter of a man who could tank this company's stock with one interview. The color drained from Nicole's face completely. Morrison continued. I'm relieving you of duty for the remainder of this flight. You'll return to your seat in the crew area, and when we land, you'll be escorted by company security for a formal investigation. Do you understand? Nicole's voice was barely a whisper. Captain, do you understand? Yes. Good. Send Monica in. Nicole left the cockpit on shaking legs. She walked past the galley, past the rows of passengers, past Kassandra Ryan, who watched her with calm, knowing eyes. Nicole didn't make eye contact with anyone. She went straight to the crew rest area and sat down, her hands trembling. She had thought she was untouchable. She had thought the uniform, the authority, the system would protect her. She had been wrong. Captain Morrison spoke with Monica next, then made an announcement over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've become aware of a seating issue that occurred during boarding. We are addressing it now. If any passenger was asked to move from their assigned seat and would like to return to it, please let a flight attendant know. We apologize for any inconvenience. The cabin went silent. Then, slowly, Ruth Johnson raised her hand. Monica appeared at her side almost instantly, her face full of quiet apology. Ma'am, I am so sorry. Would you like to return to your original seat? Ruth looked up, tears in her eyes. Yes. Please. Monica helped her gather her things. Ruth walked back to row 14, where her original seat sat empty, waiting. Passengers watched in silence as she sat down, this time with dignity restored. A few people nodded at her. One woman reached across the aisle and squeezed her hand. Malik Carter returned to row 16. Tanya Brooks and Jamal returned to row 18. And as they did, something shifted in the cabin. The air felt lighter. The silence felt less like complicity and more like solidarity. Kassandra watched it all from row 10. She didn't smile. She didn't say anything. She just pulled out her phone and sent her father a text. They fixed it. Marcus Ryan read the message in his office and allowed himself one small, satisfied nod. Then he made one more call. David, I want a meeting with the CEO of Skybridge Airlines within 24 hours. And I want a public statement addressing this incident within 48. Make it clear that if they don't cooperate, I'm going to the press with everything. David didn't ask questions. Consider it done. Marcus hung up. He stared out the window of his office, looking down at the city below. He had built his fortune by being strategic, by being patient, by playing the long game. But when it came to his daughter, when it came to injustice happening in front of her eyes, patience was not an option. Nicole Harris had thought she could enforce discrimination without consequence. She had thought the system would protect her. She had been wrong. Because the system only protected you until someone more powerful decided it shouldn't. And Marcus Ryan was very, very powerful. If you're loving this story, smash that subscribe button. We're just getting to the best part. Should Nicole Harris have been fired immediately, or does she deserve a second chance? Drop your thoughts below. Flight 447 landed in Seattle without further incident. The passengers deplaned in the usual chaotic shuffle, grabbing bags from overhead bins, checking phones, eager to get on with their lives. But for a few people on that plane, life had already changed. Ruth Johnson was met at the gate by her daughter, who wrapped her in a long hug and asked if she was okay. Ruth told her everything. And her daughter, a civil rights attorney, made a call of her own. Malik Carter walked through the terminal with his shoulders a little straighter than when he'd boarded. He had been humiliated, yes. But he had also been vindicated. And when he got to his hotel that night, he wrote a detailed account of what had happened and sent it to Skybridge Airline's corporate office, copying his lawyer. Tanya Brooks held Jamal's hand as they walked to baggage claim. Her son had already forgotten most of what happened, distracted by the excitement of seeing his grandmother. But Tanya hadn't forgotten. And she wouldn't. Nicole Harris was escorted off the plane by 2 company security officers. She didn't speak. She didn't look at anyone. She was taken to a private office in the airport, where an HR representative was already waiting with a folder full of documentation, witness statements, and video footage. She was suspended pending investigation. 3 days later, she was terminated. The story broke within hours. A passenger named Aisha, the journalism student from row 19, had posted her video to Twitter with the caption, "Flight attendant moves black passengers to the back of the plane under fake weight distribution policy. This is 2025. This is Skybridge Airlines." The video went viral. Millions of views. Thousands of shares. News outlets picked it up. Civil rights organizations issued statements. And Skybridge Airlines found itself in the worst PR crisis it had faced in a decade. The CEO issued a public apology. "We are deeply sorry for the discriminatory treatment experienced by passengers on Flight 447. This behavior does not reflect our values, and we are taking immediate action to ensure it never happens again. The employee responsible has been terminated, and we are conducting a full review of our policies and training programs." But the damage was done. Hashtags trended. Boycotts were threatened. And Marcus Ryan, who had stayed mostly silent throughout, released one brief statement through his publicist. "My daughter witnessed an injustice, and she spoke up. I'm proud of her. And I hope this serves as a reminder that discrimination has no place in our society, no matter where it happens." He didn't mention his investments. He didn't need to. Everyone already knew. 3 weeks later, Kassandra Ryan sat at the kitchen table in their Chicago penthouse, doing homework. Marcus walked in, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He set one down in front of her and sat across from her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Kassandra looked up. "About what?" "About what happened on the plane. About what you did." Kassandra thought for a moment. "I feel okay. I'm glad those people got to sit where they were supposed to." Marcus smiled. "You did the right thing, Kassandra. You saw something wrong, and you didn't stay silent. That takes courage." "You always say power should be used to help people, not hurt them," Kassandra said simply. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "That's right. And you used yours well." Kassandra nodded. Then she went back to her homework, as if dismantling systemic discrimination was just another thing an 8-year-old did on a Tuesday. But Marcus sat there for a long moment, watching his daughter, feeling a swell of pride and something deeper. Because Kassandra Ryan had done more than make a phone call. She had reminded the world that power doesn't always come with age, wealth, or authority. Sometimes it comes from a child who knows the difference between right and wrong and refuses to look away. Nicole Harris, wherever she was now, had learned that lesson the hard way. And on flights across the country, in airports and terminals and gate areas, people were paying a little more attention, watching a little more closely, speaking up a little more often, because an 8-year-old girl had shown them how. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you real stories of courage, justice, and truth every single week. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth doesn't spread itself. We do. What's one time you witnessed something wrong and spoke up? Or one time you wish you had? Share your story in the comments. Let's build a community of people who refuse to stay silent. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.